Hello, welcome to this demonstration of the CDM LDM Productivity model extension from Metadata Matters. I'm just going to give you a quick run through here of the key features of this model extension. One of the good things I like about PowerDesigner is you can right click on something and you get a contextual menu. So here's the menu for an entity. If I right click the diagram background, first of all, I get the contextual menu for a model, and inside it is the contextual menu for the diagram itself, showing all the things that come out of the box. The CDM LDM Productivity extension provides quite a few more options on those contextual menus. First of all, I'm going to go and add this extension. There it is, that's really simple. It's added the extension. I can see it attached to the model down here, a little shortcut symbol saying it's in an external file. Now if I right click my entity, I have between these two lines here, there's comment and description, create hierarchy diagram, proximity diagram, parentage. We'll have a look at these in a minute, but we have the concept of an ultimate parent. So if you've got an entity that's way down inside a complex hierarchy, you find out which entity is at the top of it, or possibly more than one. We'll see an example where an entity has two ultimate parents. Then we have some completeness options. We can add a selected entity to the current diagram if it's not already there. And we can also add things that are linked to it, things that are linked via traceability links, relationships, or inheritances. And we can select from lists. We'll see that. We can also choose to apply the standards, modeling standards, to that entity in terms of the sequence of the attributes and the name of the identifiers and the sequence of the identifiers. If I look at the diagram, contextual menu here, I can see again between a couple of grey lines we've got swap page orientation, so that will swap between landscape and portrait for you. You can add all objects, which can add everything to the diagram that could possibly be added to it. In a large model this could take a long time, but in a model this size it's relatively insignificant amount of time. For diagram symbols, we can choose to make all the hidden symbols on this diagram visible. We can remove graphical synonyms. We can remove shortcut symbols. We can hide all the link symbols, because sometimes if you have all the link symbols you really can't see the wood for the trees. So sometimes just to understand what else is there, hide all the links and then redisplay them all. If you're scripting, there's some useful output for outputting the display preferences. We can change the page size between A4 letter and A3, and we can also lay out the diagram, and I'll have a quick look at the properties for this diagram. We have here, it looks fairly complicated, but it's actually replicating what we have up here on the auto layout. We have half a dozen different types of diagram layout and a number of options for how you want to lay it out. The problem with the out of the box one is you can't set a default layout for a given diagram, but now you can. So here we're going to choose a layout. This one is hierarchical using the default option. I could make it organic. If I apply that, then my orientation options, I only have the default one, so I could just apply that if I want. And then I'm not going to do this because, oh, go on then, I will. I'm going to lay out the diagram according to those settings. Now, in this particular case, I don't really want to keep what it's done to my diagram, so I'm going to completely undo that action. Now, let's look at some other features for the entity in particular. The person entity here I've highlighted to remind me this is the one I want to look at. And I can see there are a couple of extra tabs here that weren't there before. There is a Parentage tab. This is telling me if this entity is in a hierarchy, at what level is it? And I can see here this is at the 3rd level, which means there are 2 levels above it, so as a parent and a grandparent, possibly more than one. We can see its immediate parent is an entity called mammal, but at the moment I can't see what the ultimate parent is, so there must be there's another level above mammal. So if I click on this to refresh the list of ultimate parents, it tells me that the ultimate parent is carbon being. Now this list of ultimate parents, every entity has one. By default it's not populated. If you're not using hierarchies, then there's no processing goes on to populate this at all. What you can do is, for an entity, you can refresh the ultimate parents, which I just did via the button on the form, or I can refresh the ultimates for the hierarchy, so that will refresh the list of ultimate parents for everything in the hierarchy below this entity. I can also, in the model, refresh the ultimates for the model. So this will go through and make sure that the list of ultimate parents is up to date and correct for everything in the model. On my model here, that's a relatively trivial exercise. On the other model we're going to demonstrate with, it is a bigger exercise if you were to think about it manually, but it doesn't take very long to run this. You can also see that in the model I can apply the model naming standards, and for entities I can rename all the entity identifiers if they don't meet the standards, and for attributes I have some other options as well, which we'll look at shortly. Going back to the person entity, we see that it actually is the parent of an inheritance, and one of the children of the inheritance is being displayed here. If I actually open up the inheritance, I can see it has 2 children that are PhD student and PhD manager, and I can only see one of them on the diagram. If I would like it to appear, perhaps I would have to go and find it over in the browser, that's where it is. It's only a small model, fairly trivial exercise. But instead I'm going to actually just add the child links to the diagram, and there we go, it's added PhD manager. It's a different color because the default display preferences are different on this diagram from when the other symbols were created, but that's not so much of an issue because I can just get the format of another one and apply it so it looks okay. But that was automatically added. Now for PhD manager, I might be interested in this diagram in including things that it's linked to. Okay, I could go and look at its dependencies or the list of relationships and think, oh, I could do with adding all these things on here. You can see here this is a relationship. It has a parent entity with inheritance, which is there. There's some relationships, but wouldn't it be nice if I could just add them? Well, now I can. And the completeness menu here, I can add the entity and links. It's telling me here it will be added to the diagram if it's not already present. It is. Now I go through the selection lists. I can see there are 3 relationships there with wonderful names. I'm going to select all those. I can also see there's an inheritance link, which is on the diagram. Here's PhD manager. These are the relationships that were added. Let me move the inheritance link out of the way there. It's actually brought in a couple of entities and added a relationship through to laboratory up here. So those are my three relationships that weren't on the diagram before. So now I know, if I run it again, completeness, add entity and links, it says it was all there already. I didn't need to add anything, which is quite reassuring. Now if I go to my empty diagram, open my empty diagram here, there is nothing on this. Let's say I'm building the diagram and I want to focus on the person entity. I can do the same thing again in completeness, add the entity and links. So it will add person, there are the relationships it has, there's the inheritance that it has, there's the inheritance link to the parent, and here we go, it's added all that to the diagram. I'm going to lay it out according to the default for that diagram. Well, it's not brilliant, but it will do me for now. Now I would like to add contact details on there. It's not on the diagram, but I'm going to go to completeness, add that entity and links. So it's going to add that entity, these two relationships. Here's contact detail and external examiner, which is what was added alongside it. It's interesting seeing this, that was everything connected to contact details. And if I look at external examiner, add entity and links, same two relationships, there are no more. So I can see that these two entities here, for some strange reason, let's highlight them, are not linked to the rest of the model. I'm certain of that. Okay, now I'm going to show you another new feature. Let's go back to our student registration diagram here, and we know that person has a couple of subtypes because we added the second one, PhD manager, to the diagram. Wouldn't it be nice to see the whole hierarchy that person fits within? Well, I can do that. I'm going to create a hierarchy diagram, and here we are. Here is carbon being the ultimate parent at the top, mammal and person. PhD student has moved up because there's a relationship connecting it, but if I move it down here, you will see that it actually does have an inheritance link there. It is actually a child, so I do have to move the diagram around a little bit. But there we are. That pictures the whole hierarchy. Now, because this is a hierarchy diagram, there is one extra feature that's available now. And I can demonstrate if I move things around, if I take something off the diagram, I can actually, in the diagram context menu, refresh this hierarchy diagram, which completely reapplies all the rules that applied when I created it. This is now bang up to date. Something else I would like to do is show you a more complicated one. So take this example from the financial information model for banking, FIBO. We have the entity deposit account, and I've just kept this simple just for demonstration purposes, and I'd like to see the hierarchy diagram for this particular entity. Now this is considerably bigger. Here's deposit account sitting in roughly the middle of two hierarchies, because there are actually two ultimate parents here, product and account. And I could, if I wanted to, extend this with completeness and add links. There are a couple of relationships missing there. The inheritance is already there. Those links are already there. So it did actually add a couple of entities to the diagram here, but I might choose to do that. Again, I can refresh the hierarchy diagram so it's only showing the hierarchy. If I really wanted to see just deposit account and what's around it, I could create a proximity diagram. So here we have the proximity diagram for deposit account, showing that it's the parent of the two entities on the left of it. It is a child of investment or deposit account. It's a child of banking product. It also has relationships to has, party and role, and to provides. Now this is everything that's linked to that entity. But I might think, banking product, I'm interested in that one. Let me see everything related to banking product, and I can do just the same thing here. Banking product, there we go. We can see the diagrams being created there, and there's nothing to stop me if I choose to create another proximity diagram for banking product, and that's just called banking product 2. I can create a hierarchy diagram for it. I'm not suggesting you would keep all these diagrams, but if you want to visualize your model and understand it, it's very useful to automatically be able to create these kinds of views. So what I'm going to do now is go back to my student registration diagram and close everything else. Let's take a look at the PhD entity here. I can see that it's got a couple of attributes in the identifier, the primary identifier here. We've got, those are the ones that are underlined. We've got this one here and this one here, and they don't meet our modeling standards. Our modeling standard says they need to be at the top. So what I'm going to do is actually on the standard submenu resequence those attributes, and there they are. They've just been moved to the top. All the other attributes are in the same order. There are a couple more options here on the modeling standards. I can actually rename the identifiers, but I'm going to resequence them first because that's the best thing to do. You see here my identifiers, I have the alternate identifier and then the primary identifier. And our modeling standard says the first one in the list should be primary, and they've swapped around now. Now I'm going to rename them because they don't meet the naming standards. Our naming standards should say they should be the name of the entity followed by PI or AI with a number. So now those meet our naming standards. We can also apply naming standards to relationships. Now you see here these relationships, relationship 17. That's not a very meaningful name. If I find that in the browser, that doesn't help me at all to understand the model. Wouldn't it be much better if the name told me something about it? Well, if I successfully click it, I can apply the relationship naming standard. And it is called it person dash 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 less than account. It's actually the metadata, it's constructed the name from the metadata. And if I was to give it a role name, be owner of, person may be owner of one or more account, as it says here in the cardinalities. And now I rename the relationship, it's in there. So I can see in the browser, on the diagram, wherever else it's useful, that this relationship connects person and account. It's a one-to-many, and the role name from parent to child is be owner of. When I apply modeling standards to the whole model, or run the model check, which I'll show you shortly, it will apply the relationship naming standard to all those relationships. So in this case, they would all need to be renamed. Here's the standard check model, and I can see when I expand entity, there are a number of checks down here. I can actually check identify names against naming standards. There's some generic ones here that apply to everything. then it will give you an error if there's a double space in a name. I can turn on automatic correction if I want to, so that will actually replace double spaces with single spaces. There's no automatic correction for this one. It just tells you if the entity name doesn't begin with an uppercase alpha character. Here we've got the sequence of identifiers. If they're in the wrong order, then this will sort them, and the little first aid symbol on there, the little red cross, tells me that it's going to fix things. We get a report here, we get a warning if something has multiple parents. We set it as an error, but of course you can actually change that to a warning. If you would prefer it to be a warning all the time, we can just change that in the model extension. Again, here we've got the primary attribute sequence. I can turn on the automatic correction there, make it an error if you really want it to be an error as opposed to a warning. What I'm going to do now is apply the model naming standards, and that's easy enough to do. I can right click the diagram background or the model name in the browser and apply model naming standards. And you can see all the relationship names have changed because they were all wrong. What you haven't seen is that all the identifiers have been renamed as well. Finally, I'm going to show you a couple more features for hiding and showing things. What I can actually do is, let's say my diagram is a little complicated. I'm showing it to some users, some business people, and they're not interested in seeing the foreign keys and inherited attributes that have come down through inheritance hierarchies. So I could actually say that across the model I'm going to hide all the inherited attributes. And you saw the PhD student entity shrink then. If I undo, you'll see that and several other entities shrank. I'm going to, again, hide the inherited attributes. Those are the ones that are in there for relational modeling reasons. And again, I'm going to go to the menu and hide all the foreign keys. So every entity symbol now only includes the attributes defined as being part of that entity and that haven't gone there for some other reason. So it actually looks a lot more like a conceptual data model now, though it isn't one. If I now want to show them all again, I can actually say show all attributes, or I can just show the inherited ones or the foreign keys. If I click on show all attributes, they've all come back. Every single attribute is visible. Last but not least, a couple of features. This one here, I've got a relationship. If I want this relationship line to be straight, connect the same 2 points, but be dead straight, I can just right click the line if I get it right and select remove all corners. It now connects the same 2 points but goes in a dead straight line. Final thing is we have graphical synonyms on this diagram here. We have matriculation file and laboratory. These are entities that have more than one symbol on the diagram, and perhaps I want to get rid of them. In this case, I could just select one and delete it, and it would go, and all the relationship links that it has would move across to the other instance. But on a more complicated diagram, perhaps I'm not really sure where they all are. I just want to simplify it. I can go to the diagram menu, diagram symbols, remove graphical synonyms. And you'll notice I can also remove shortcut symbols as well, but I'm not going to do that because I don't have any in here. If I remove graphical synonyms, those two entity symbols have been removed, and all the relationships that used to connect to them now go to the original entity symbols. And that's it. If you need some more information, please use the contact details shown on the screen. Thank you. Goodbye.